Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we strip back the bronze statues and the gilded frames to look at the beating, often bleeding heart of power. We explore the choices that reshaped continents, the ambition that soared beyond the clouds, and the inevitable crash that follows when a single man tries to command the world. Today, our gaze falls upon a figure who casts an impossibly long shadow across history: Napoleon Bonaparte. More than just a general or an emperor, he was a force of nature, a strategic genius who could see battlefields like a chessboard, a charismatic leader who could inspire men to walk into hell, and ultimately, a man undone by the very traits that elevated him. His story is a tapestry woven with dizzying victories at Austerlitz, the audacious coup that seized a revolution, the coronation that crowned himself, and the sprawling legal code that still shapes laws today. But beneath the glory lay a restless soul, forever pushing the boundaries of the possible, convinced of his own destiny, perhaps even his own infallibility. This isn't just a tale of battles won and lost. It's a journey into the psychology of absolute power, the infectious nature of ambition, and the often brutal cost of greatness. You will step onto freezing battlefields, stand in opulent palaces, and witness the private moments that reveal the man behind the myth. We will ask uncomfortable questions, challenge long-held assumptions, and hopefully leave you with a richer, more human understanding of this monumental figure. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. The Emperor's Retreat from Hell. You stand in the infinite white of the Russian winter, circa late 1812. The wind tears at you, a physical force that steals breath and sanity. Around you, a spectral army stumbles, remnants of the Grande Armée, once 500,000 strong, now a few frozen, starving thousands wrapped in rags and despair. The air rings with the crunch of snow underfoot, the ragged coughs of the dying, and the distant, menacing howl of wolves. This is the stark reality of unchecked ambition. Not the glory of the triumphal arch, but the brutal consequence of believing your will can command even nature itself. You had marched east with the sun at your back, believing Moscow would kneel, that a Tsar would bend to your iron resolve. You saw yourself as a modern Alexander, carving a new empire from the vast plains. But Russia did not kneel. It burned. And now the retreat is an epic of suffering, a testament to the catastrophic blindness that can afflict even the sharpest mind when it becomes convinced of its own infallibility. The decision had been made weeks ago, perhaps even months, in the suffocating opulence of the Kremlin. Stay too long in Moscow, expecting a peace offer that would never come. It was a gamble born of pride, a refusal to admit that his grand design had stalled. Now, the payout is paid in frozen limbs and broken spirits. You watch as soldiers huddle around meager fires, gnawing on scraps, their eyes hollow with starvation and despair. They marched for him, believed in him, and he led them here. A surprising detail often overlooked in the grand narrative is the sheer logistical collapse, not just from the cold and Cossacks, but from internal corruption and incompetence that crippled supply lines even before the worst of the winter hit. Officers enriching themselves, wagons delayed, food rotting or stolen. It was a rot at the core, exacerbated by the impossible scale of the campaign. a subtle tremor beneath the surface of the Grand Armée's power that the Russian wilderness exposed with brutal force. This wasn't just nature versus man. It was systemic failure meeting an implacable environment. The emperor's carriage, a solitary point of luxury in this frozen hell, passes by. Inside sits Napoleon. He is retreating, yes, abandoning his men to the elements and the Cossacks, rushing back to Paris to rebuild his power, to conjure another army. But he is also retreating from a truth, that the world is larger, more complex, and less controllable than his ambition had allowed him to believe. This scene is the turning point, the moment where the narrative shifts irrevocably from the dizzying ascent to the painful, inevitable decline. It is the proof that even Napoleon Bonaparte, master of Europe, could not command the snow nor the unwavering resistance of a determined people. He leaves behind a trail of dead and dying, a sacrifice on the altar of his own hubris. He knows he must return to France to shore up his political power before news of the catastrophe shatters his image entirely. It is a pragmatic, brutal decision. Save the throne, even if it means sacrificing the army. But the men left behind know. They understand the cold equation. Ask yourself, standing there watching that carriage disappear into the blizzard, feeling the gnawing hunger and the bite of the wind, what would you feel towards the man inside? Was his decision a necessary evil for the sake of the empire, or the ultimate betrayal of the soldiers who had given him everything? This retreat wasn't just a military disaster. It was a moral one, a moment where the shining armor of the conqueror cracked, revealing the calculating, self-preserving leader underneath. You are a boy named Napoleon, on an island forged by fire and forgotten by empires, Corsica. Not quite France, not entirely Italy, a wild, rugged place where loyalty shifts like the sea tide and blood feuds simmer beneath the Mediterranean sun. You speak French, yes, but with the hard, melodic lilt of your home, marking you instantly as an outsider in the schools across the water. You feel the gaze, the quiet judgment, the casual dismissal, because your origins are provincial. Your name, strange. Your family, the Bonapartes, straddles the divide, trying to navigate the brutal factional politics of the island, a dance between independence and reluctant assimilation, a microcosm of the larger world's power struggles. Here, respect isn't a birthright, it's a conquest. You watch the fiery orator Pasquale Paoli, the island's hero, defy the French, embodying the fierce, untamed spirit you both admire and find frustratingly chaotic. You see how quickly allegiances crumble, how easily power is seized and lost. Survival demands cunning, adaptability, and a will harder than Corsican granite. The boy, already consuming books on history and artillery, understands that force is a language universally spoken. He sees the island's yearning for order, even as it resists external control. And perhaps a silent, burgeoning thought forms. What if I could bring that order? This chip on your shoulder, this persistent awareness of being the other, doesn't cripple you, it sharpens you. It breeds a relentless drive to prove them wrong, to rise above the limitations they perceive. It's tragic, in a way, that the very island whose independence your family once championed, the island that shaped your fierce identity, is a place you must ultimately leave behind to fulfill the potential it helped forge. The untamed energy of Corsica is channeled inward, becoming the fuel for an ambition so vast it will eventually seek to impose order on an entire continent. Ask yourself, how much of who you are is shaped by the place you came from, especially if that place felt like a cage or a challenge. Does the sting of being an outsider hold you back, or does it become the invisible engine driving you forward? The quiet boy from a forgotten island, dreaming of cannons and geometry, shows that the most seismic ambitions can begin with nothing more than a burning desire to be seen, to be reckoned with, when the world expects you to remain small. You are now a cadet at the École Militaire in Paris, a small figure dwarfed by the imposing stone, a world away from Corsica. The air here is thick with the entitlement of French aristocracy, and you, young Bonaparte, feel every icy stare. They mock your accent, your provincial origins, your intensity that borders on obsession. They see a scrawny, awkward outsider, but you see a crucible. This isn't just school. It's a furnace designed to forge instruments of war. Surrounded by privileged boys who coast on their names, you bury yourself in the cold, hard logic of military science. The library becomes your sanctuary. Dusty volumes on history, geography, mathematics, and most critically, artillery. Your only companions. Hours melt into days as you devour treatises on ballistics, the calculations of trajectory and force, the geometric precision required to command chaos on a battlefield. While they socialize, you are mastering the language of cannon fire and troop movements. Here, ambition isn't loud declarations. It's the quiet hum of relentless study. You recognize, perhaps instinctively, that raw talent, the spark that makes a leader, is insufficient. It must be hammered into shape by discipline and understanding. The slights and isolations that sting so deeply don't break you. They temper you, turning resentment into a potent, focused fuel for mastery. Every dismissive laugh, every sneer at your name, deepens your resolve to prove them not just wrong, but obsolete. You learn to observe with unnerving clarity, analyze complex problems with a chilling detachment, plan with a precision that few can match. The rules of engagement aren't just theories in books. They are a language you are becoming fluent in, a system where intellect and calculation can overcome brute force and inherited privilege. It's an unforgiving environment, yes, but it's shaping the very core of the commander you will become. The loneliness is a price you pay, but the knowledge gained is power earned. Ask yourself, how do you transform adversity or perceived slights into productive energy? The bullied cadet mastering ballistics teaches a profound lesson. True power comes not just from will, but from competence built through relentless effort and focused learning, turning the stones thrown at you into the foundation of an empire. The air hangs thick with the acrid smoke of distant cannons and the damp chill of the Mediterranean coast. You are here, a young artillery officer barely out of school, thrust into the swirling, incoherent storm that is the siege of Toulon. Royalists, clinging desperately to the old world, hold the vital port, backed by the formidable redcoats of the British fleet, a dagger aimed at the heart of the revolution. Chaos isn't just outside the city walls. It's endemic within the Revolutionary Army Command, a viper's nest of political appointees, backstabbers, and men utterly unqualified for the task. You witness senior officers bickering, issuing contradictory orders, failing to grasp the basics of siege warfare or the terrain before them. But you? Your eyes cut through the fog of incompetence. You see it, clear as day, not just a path to victory, but the path. It lies not in frontal assaults on fortified walls, but in silencing the enemy's strength, their naval power. The key isn't the city itself, but the heights, the promontories overlooking the harbor. Control those, place artillery there, and you can make the harbor untenable for the British fleet, forcing their withdrawal and isolating the royalist defenders. It is a stroke of tactical genius, simple yet profound, cutting through the revolutionary noise with the cold logic of geometry and ballistics. You present this plan, this audacious, simple truth, to the bewildered, self-important generals. They dismiss it, too preoccupied with their internal squabbles or wedded to conventional failing tactics. Your low rank, your Corsican accent, your sheer clarity in a world of confusion, it all counts against you. You feel the frustration, the burn of ambition stifled not by superior strategy, but by sheer pig-headed ineptitude. This is a critical moment. Do you retreat, simmer in resentment, or push? Then, desperation. As the siege drags on, losses mount, and the commanders exhaust their limited imagination. A window creaks open. The sheer failure forces them to look beyond their prejudices, towards the young officer whose seemingly insane plan is the only one left. You don't just have the idea. You seize the opportunity born of their failure. You demand the resources, the men, the independence to execute. You cut through red tape with pure force of will, scrounging for cannon, organizing artillery batteries, pushing men and materiel towards those crucial heights against all odds. This wasn't just planning. It was brutal, decisive action. You are everywhere at once, directing fire, calculating trajectories, exposing yourself to danger because you understand the stakes. The capture of the key position, Fort Leguillet, which you would later famously dub Little Gibraltar, is a testament not only to your tactical mind, but to your sheer, unadulterated gumption. It proves that ambition means little without the courage to act decisively when the moment arrives. The British fleet withdraws under your cannon fire, the port falls, and the revolution claims a crucial victory. And you, the obscure artillery officer, are no longer obscure. You have cut your name into the heart of revolutionary France with cannon fire. Ask yourself, standing in that chaotic camp, surrounded by bluster and incompetence, would you have seen the key? More importantly, would you have possessed the conviction and the courage to push your plan, to seize command when it wasn't freely given, and to execute with ruthless efficiency? The young officer at Toulon didn't wait for permission to be great. He simply was great, and let his actions speak the language of power. It was a moment where ambition met opportunity, and competence provided the spark that ignited a future empire. You stand before the army of Italy in 1796. They are ghosts draped in rags, a skeletal force shivering in the damp chill of the Alps. Unpaid, undersupplied, ravaged by disease and desertion, they are outnumbered by the Austrian colossus looming before them. Morale is a forgotten word. You, a young general, barely 26, gaze upon these demoralized men, and a fire ignites within you, and you will use that fire to ignite them. You don't offer pity, you offer a vision. Your voice, sharp and commanding, cuts through the mountain air. You promise not just survival, but glory. You paint a vivid picture of Italy, the richest, most fertile plains in the world, ripe for the taking. You speak of honor, of liberation, of a share in the spoils that await them. This is not merely a military address. It is a revolution of the spirit, a gambler laying down his impossible hand and daring everyone to play with him. It's a striking contrast to the cautious, exhausted generals who came before you. Where they saw insurmountable odds, you saw a chessboard waiting for a bold move. This campaign isn't just a series of battles. It's a masterclass in leadership, fueled by relentless personal ambition transformed into a collective force. You don't remain aloof. You are everywhere, planning, leading charges, sharing the harsh conditions, even eating the same meager rations. You connect with the soldiers, learning their names, understanding their plight, making them believe your impossible dream is their destiny. The traditional military structure gives way to something more primal, loyalty forged in shared hardship, and the intoxicating promise of plunder and prestige. You tear through Italy with a speed and audacity that confounds the seasoned Austrian commanders. Your unconventional tactics, concentrating force, rapid marches, striking where least expected, are revolutionary. One moment you are defending, the next you have seized the initiative, sweeping aside armies twice your size. The soldiers, once spirits broken, are now animated, driven by the scent of victory and the tangible rewards of each conquest. What happens here is more than military success. It's the birth of a legend. The Army of Italy becomes an extension of your will, bound by a shared ambition for glory and riches. You prove that leadership against overwhelming odds requires more than just strategic genius. It demands the ability to articulate a future so compelling, so dazzling, that others are willing to endure unimaginable suffering and risk everything to attain it alongside you. It is a profound, almost terrifying demonstration of how personal ambition can be transmuted into a collective crusade, binding leader and led in pursuit of a shared destiny forged in fire and gold. Ask yourself, when faced with demoralized troops and overwhelming odds, how would you inspire them? How do you turn personal ambition into a shared, compelling vision that makes the impossible seem not just possible, but inevitable? This campaign reveals the raw power of connecting strategy with an irresistible narrative, turning a ragged army into an unstoppable storm. You sail east, across the Mediterranean, not just with an army, but with a floating city of savants, scientists, artists, engineers, historians. 300 of them. This isn't just a military invasion, it's an expedition of enlightenment, a bold, almost audacious fusion of conquest and discovery. The goal is vast, almost unfathomable. Strike at the heart of British power by threatening their route to India. Plant French influence in the cradle of civilization. And unveil the secrets of ancient Egypt itself. Its ambition unbound, seeing the East not just as territory to conquer, but as a historical stage upon which to perform. As your ships approach the shores, the air crackles with a sense of destiny mixed with palpable risk. The British Navy, a lurking behemoth, patrols these waters. This grand vision is a massive gamble against practical realities and the power of rivals. But you land, push inland, the desert heat a new kind of enemy. You face the Mamluk cavalry, fierce but outmatched by disciplined squares. And then, you stand before the Great Pyramids at Giza, ancient, immense, silent witnesses to millennia. You utter the words that will echo through history. Soldiers, 40 centuries look down upon you. This moment etched into legend is pure theater. Is it genuine awe? Certainly. But it's also calculated, a masterclass in linking your campaign, your destiny, to the weight of history itself. You are not just a general. You are an inheritor of antiquity, a bringer of progress to lands slumbering in time. This is where the propaganda machine truly begins to turn. While your army fights the desert, disease, and elusive foes, the savants begin their work, meticulously documenting everything, from flora and fauna to ancient hieroglyphs. This expedition, even as it faces immense hardship, is creating the enduring image of Napoleon, not just as a conqueror, but as a patron of science, a curious mind exploring the world. Here lies the crucial irony. The military venture, despite initial victories, is fundamentally flawed. The British, under Admiral Nelson, find your fleet anchored in Aboukir Bay and annihilate it. Suddenly, your army is trapped, isolated from France. The grand strategic objective of threatening India, now a distant fantasy. The reality on the ground is harsh. Soldiers dying from disease, morale plummeting. Yet the narrative being crafted tells a different story. Back in France, the reports emphasize the discoveries, the ancient wonders unveiled, the liberation of the Egyptian people from Mamluk tyranny, ignoring the fact that French rule was also conquest. The Description de l'Égypte, the monumental multi-volume work compiled by your savants, becomes a cornerstone of Egyptology and a lasting testament to the scientific side of the expedition. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone by French soldiers provides the key to deciphering hieroglyphs, unlocking the very history you claimed looked down upon your men. These are genuine achievements born from the expedition, but they occur alongside and in spite of the military and logistical failures. It is the skillful control of information, the emphasis on these cultural triumphs over the strategic disaster, that allows you to later abandon the trapped army and return to France, not as the leader of a failed campaign, but as a hero, celebrated for the knowledge gained and the glory perceived. This Egyptian mirage teaches a profound lesson about ambition. How much of your drive is for concrete achievement, and how much is for the perception of achievement? You proved that you could orchestrate grand gestures, commission groundbreaking research, and craft a compelling public image, even when the practical foundations of your venture were collapsing. Neglecting naval power, underestimating logistics in a hostile environment. These practical failures turned a potential strategic victory into a costly trap. Yet, the narrative control saved your personal reputation, at least for a time. Ask yourself, when building your own ambitions, do you prioritize the grand vision and the story you tell, or the often unglamorous practical realities that determine true success or failure? What would you have done, trapped in Egypt with a defeated fleet, knowing the world outside was receiving a carefully curated version of events? The Egyptian campaign is a magnificent, costly illustration of ambition's duality. Its power to inspire discovery, but also its potential for self-delusion when the narrative outweighs the reality. He arrives in Paris, slipping back into a France tearing itself apart. The Directory, weak and corrupt, is a ship taking on water, listing dangerously. You, Napoleon Bonaparte, the conqueror of Egypt, or at least the man who left before the true disaster unfolded, are seen by many not as a deserter, but as a savior, a popular general, untainted, they hope, by Parisian squabbles. The political currents swirl around you, dangerous and tempting. You feel the pull, the whispers of powerful men who see in you the strength they lack. They are plotters, architects of change who need a hammer, a sword. You are that weapon, sharp and ready, This is the moment the soldier contemplates becoming the statesman through force. You align your destiny with theirs. The day arrives, the 18th of Brumaire, year 8 of the Republic, November 9th, 1799. The plan: shepherd the legislative councils, the Council of Ancients and the Council of 500, out of Paris to St. Cloud, away from Parisian mobs, supposedly for their safety. Once there, persuade them to dissolve the Directory and appoint a new, provisional government. But history rarely unfolds according to plan, especially when ambition and fear fill the room. You address the ancients first, securing their uneasy cooperation. Then, you proceed to the Council of 500, housed in the Orangery. This is where the careful political maneuver collapses into raw, desperate chaos. You step into the hall, accompanied by grenadiers, soldiers, amidst politicians. Immediately, the atmosphere curdles. Deputies leap from their seats, shouting, denouncing you as a dictator, an outlaw, a tyrant. Down with the tyrant, outlaw him, they scream. They surge forward, a sea of angry faces, shaking fists. The noise is deafening, disorienting. You, the battle-hardened general who stood before Mameluke charges, are caught off guard by this civilian fury. The physical pressure, the verbal assault, the sheer unexpectedness of it all, it's too much. You falter. The words catch in your throat. You stumble back, reportedly pale, almost collapsing, escorted, perhaps even half-dragged from the hall by your accompanying soldiers. It's a moment of profound, terrifying vulnerability. The conqueror paralyzed by a political mob. This wasn't the swift, clean seizure of power you envisioned. It was messy, terrifying, and nearly disastrous. Had it not been for your younger brother, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the president of the Council of 500, the coup might have failed then and there. Lucien, thinking quickly, rushed outside, seized a sword, and dramatically pointed it at your chest, vowing to kill you himself if you ever betrayed liberty. Then, turning to the troops gathered outside, he rallied them, declaring the deputies inside were held hostage by assassins in the pay of the Directory. It was a brilliant, theatrical lie. Riding that wave of manufactured crisis, you ordered your troops, led by Murat, to clear the hall. With bayonets fixed and drums beating, the soldiers advanced, scattering the terrified deputies through windows and doors into the gathering dusk. The legislative bodies were effectively dispersed by military force. That night, a compliant remnant of deputies, rounded up and coerced, voted to abolish the Directory and establish a new government, the Consulate, with you, Sieyes, and Ducos as provisional consuls. The coup succeeded, not through elegant persuasion, but through political maneuvering, a theatrical lie, and ultimately, brute military power. It teaches a stark lesson. Seizing the state is rarely clean. It requires courage, yes, but also the willingness to gamble on alliances, navigate treacherous political waters, and be prepared for unpredictable, even embarrassing resistance. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that even the most ambitious general can falter when faced with a different kind of battlefield. Ask yourself, in pursuit of your goals, what lines would you be willing to cross? What moment of personal vulnerability might reveal the true cost of that ambition? You are now First Consul of France, the dust from the coup of 18 Brumaire still settling in the grand halls. The revolution's storm has raged for a decade, tearing down the old world, unleashing chaos and devouring its own children. France is fractured, financially ruined, its laws a patchwork, its infrastructure crumbling. The people crave order, stability, a firm hand after years of turbulent freedom and fear. You provide it. This is not a battlefield, yet the strategic challenges are immense. You approach the state like a besieged fortress that needs to be rebuilt from its foundations. The same relentless energy, the same eye for detail applied to troop movements and logistics is now turned inward, focused on civil administration. You are a builder, an architect of state, wielding near absolute power, but within the novel framework of a republic you largely dictate. The most enduring monument of this era isn't a triumphal arch, that comes later, but a book. The civil code of the French people, soon to be the Napoleonic Code. You don't just sign decrees, you immerse yourself in the debates, sometimes for hours, astonishing the seasoned jurists with your grasp of principle and practical application. You demand clarity, logic, uniformity. This isn't merely a legal reform. It's an attempt to codify the revolution's gains: equality before the law, property rights, abolition of feudalism, while restoring order and authority. It creates a single, coherent legal system for the nation, a blueprint for governance that will spread across Europe and endure for centuries. It's a surprising detail for a military man, isn't it? That his most lasting impact might be in law, not war. Finances are a disaster. The Directorate printed worthless paper money. The treasury is empty. You establish the Bank of France, a central institution to manage state debt and issue stable currency. You implement efficient tax collection. The economy begins to breathe again. Infrastructure, neglected for years, sees massive investment. Roads are built and repaired, canals dug, ports improved. Paris, the heart of France, is beautified with new bridges, quays, and fountains, erasing some of the scars of the revolution and reflecting the new, ambitious energy. Education, too, is restructured. The meritocratic system of lycées is created, designed to train the future administrators and officers of the state, open, theoretically, to talent regardless of birth. It's another piece in the grand design of a strong, centralized, efficient nation loyal to its head. The contrast is stark. The preceding years were defined by guillotines, coups, and economic freefall. Now, under your direction, there is a palpable sense of purpose, of progress, of a nation being systematically rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick. This period reveals ambition in its constructive form. Your drive is directed towards creating a stable, prosperous, and well-ordered society, a solid base from which France can project power and influence. You demonstrate that the energy behind ambition can be harnessed for immense good, building institutions and systems that can outlast fleeting military victories. It's a phase where your personal glory seems genuinely intertwined with the welfare and strength of the nation you lead. Ask yourself, watching this transformation, was this ambition purely for personal gain, a stepping stone to empire, or does it involve a genuine desire to build something lasting and beneficial beyond yourself, a France reborn from the ashes? The era of the First Consul highlights a complex truth. The most impactful ambition often combines personal drive with a genuine focus on creating value and stability for a larger group. You are not just conquering, you are constructing. But the siren song of the battlefield is never far away. December 2nd, 1804. The air inside Notre Dame Cathedral is thick with incense and anticipation, the weight of history pressing down. You stand ready, draped in imperial splendor, the assembled dignitaries, a sea of silk and velvet. The Pope, brought from Rome as a prop in this carefully staged drama, is present, ready to perform the ancient rite. But this is not an ancient rite for you. This is a declaration. As Pius VII raises the heavy imperial crown, you step forward. There is no pause, no hesitation. You take the crown from the altar yourself, lifting its weight and placing it firmly upon your own head. The gasp that ripples through the cathedral is barely audible over the orchestrated music, but its meaning is deafening. You do not receive your power from God, from the Church, or from any inherited right. You declare in front of the world that this power is taken, seized by your own will, and sanctioned only by the will of the French people, a will you interpret, you embody, you now claim to own. Turning, you then crown your beloved Josephine, binding her fate and implicitly the future of France to your own person, your own lineage. This is more than just a ceremony. It is the formal, audacious coronation of ambition itself. The shift from First Consul of a republic, however autocratic, to hereditary Emperor of the French, signals a fundamental, almost terrifying transformation. The scaffolding of republicanism, however theoretical it had become, is stripped away. Ambition is no longer about leading the nation. It is about possessing it, founding a dynasty, elevating yourself and your family to the highest possible plane. The nation becomes a vehicle for your personal glorification, its destiny intertwined with the fortunes of the House of Bonaparte. Legitimacy is sought not through the consent of the governed in a new form, but through the perceived permanence and tradition of monarchy, however freshly minted. The symbol is chillingly clear. Personal glory has become the state's singular raison d'etre. At what precise moment does aspiration curdle into entitlement? When does the belief in one's own capabilities morph into the conviction of one's indispensability, perhaps even divinity? The self-coronation in Notre Dame is history's most dramatic illustration of this perilous transition, a step taken not merely for the stability or glory of France, but explicitly, demonstrably, for the glorification and perpetuation of you, the Emperor, the Founder. It reveals the seductive, ruinous danger of believing you are not just essential, but the very source of the state's authority, a belief that can only end in isolation and ultimately collapse. Ask yourself, when you stand on the precipice of ultimate power, is it strength that lets you take the crown yourself? Or is it the first sign that the crown is beginning to consume the man? The ink dries on the parchment. From the gilded halls of the Tuileries Palace, your will flows out like a conquering army across the continent. This is the age of imperial decree. You sit, not just as Emperor of the French, but as the architect of a new European order. Old kingdoms crumble like sandcastles before the tide of your ambition. New ones are forged in the furnace of your strategic mind and dynastic needs. The map of Europe is less a geographical reality and more a canvas upon which you paint your vision of control. Your brothers, your sisters, your stepson, they are dispatched like pieces on a grand chessboard. Coronated kings and queens of Holland, Naples, Spain, Westphalia, Lombardy. Old dynasties, steeped in centuries of tradition and legitimacy, are swept aside with a flick of your pen. These are not mere appointments. They are anchors, intended to secure your dominion, to create a unified continental system loyal to Paris, loyal to you. In your mind, you are not merely a conqueror. You are a civilizer, a modern-day Charlemagne, destined to unite a fractured Europe under a banner of efficiency, law, and progress. Your progress, your law, your efficiency. The scale of this ambition is breathtaking. It has metastasized from the initial, pragmatic goal of securing France's borders into a colossal desire to command the entire European stage, dictating terms from Lisbon to Warsaw. Yet, this immense power comes with a profound blind spot. You wield military might and political cunning with unparalleled skill, imposing your decrees without genuine consultation or concern for the disparate desires, languages, and ancient identities of the millions now under your sway. The Catalans, the Neapolitans, the Dutch, the Poles, they are subjects to be governed, resources to be leveraged, not peoples with inherent rights or aspirations of their own. There's a tragic irony here. The man who rose from the revolution, ostensibly championing self-determination against old regimes, now crushes it with a more efficient hand. This disregard for the will of others, born from the intoxicating isolation of absolute power, sows the very seeds of future resistance. You see a unified empire. They feel a foreign boot on their neck. Ask yourself, how does such immense power warp perception, making the desires of the conquered seem like mere inconveniences? Ruling an empire built on conquest demonstrates a fundamental flaw. Centralized imperial ambition almost invariably underestimates the deep, primal need for self-determination among diverse populations. It's a lesson the continent will have to learn, and you, tragically, will teach it to yourself through bitter experience. The waves still crash with the echo of Trafalgar. Britain, ruler of the seas, remains a fortress across the narrow channel, untouchable by your armies. Direct invasion, the swift, decisive blow you crave, is impossible. You stand on the coast, gaze fixed eastward across Europe. A new strategy is needed, one that uses the land, the vast continent you now dominate, as the weapon. If you cannot reach their island heart, you will sever the arteries that feed it. You devise the continental system. This is not merely a trade embargo. It is an economic siege on a global scale, a decree attempting to rewrite the fundamental laws of commerce. Every nation under your sway, every allied kingdom, satellite state, and conquered territory is forbidden to trade with Great Britain. No British goods shall enter their ports. No continental goods shall leave for British shores. You picture their warehouses overflowing, their merchants bankrupt, their economy suffocating, until the proud island nation is forced to sue for peace on your terms. It is a grand, audacious stroke, ambition attempting to dictate economics through sheer, unyielding force of will. You enforce this system with relentless pressure. Allies who drag their feet feel your weight. When Portugal, Britain's oldest ally, hesitates to comply fully, you dispatch an army, marching across Spain, initiating a chain of events that will become a festering wound. The disastrous intervention in Spain flows directly from the need to secure the Iberian Peninsula for the continental system, forcing the Bourbon monarchy out, installing your brother, and igniting a brutal, draining guerrilla war that will bleed your empire for years. This isn't just about trade anymore. It's about absolute, unquestioning obedience. The system itself becoming a justification for expansion and conquest. The tragic irony is thick here. The system meant to weaken Britain begins to weaken you more. While British merchants find new markets elsewhere, South America, the Caribbean, the continent stifles. Ports lie idle, once thriving trading cities wither. Essential colonial goods like sugar, coffee, and cotton become scarce and ruinously expensive, leading to widespread hardship and resentment among your own subjects and those you rule. Smuggling becomes rampant, a vast underground economy, undermining your decrees at every turn. People need goods, merchants need profit. Your grand design crashes against the stubborn, decentralized forces of human nature and economic reality. The continental system is a prime example of strategic overreach. The concept is bold, but its execution is impractical, unsustainable, and ultimately self-defeating. You believe your authority is enough to bend global supply chains and defy the forces of supply and demand. You refuse to acknowledge the complex realities of international trade, the economic pain inflicted on your allies, or the sheer impossibility of policing a coastline stretching from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. This isn't just a policy failure. It's a demonstration that even immense power cannot always force complex systems to bend to its will. Forcing adherence creates more problems than it solves. Hardship, resentment, and ultimately defiance, particularly from a powerful empire like Russia, which finds the system economically ruinous. Ask yourself, can any single will, no matter how strong, truly control something as vast and intricate as the global economy? The failure of the continental system reveals the limits of centralized power when faced with decentralized human action and market forces. It's a lesson etched in empty ports and starving populations across Europe. Ambition, unchecked by a recognition of reality and unintended consequences, becomes a cage of your own making. Do you recognize the limits of your control, especially in complex systems driven by millions of individual decisions? Or do you push harder, doubling down on a failing policy, convinced that sheer force will eventually prevail? The pressure builds, the resentment simmers, setting the stage for future conflicts born directly from the strains of this impossible blockade. You make your move on Spain, a swift political maneuver, you think. The Bourbon king is weak, the country ripe for rearrangement. You depose the monarch, install your brother Joseph on the throne in Madrid. It's a chess piece placed, a capital secured. You expect quiet compliance, maybe a few skirmishes, easily handled by your seasoned legions. You expect Spain to fall in line, another jewel in the imperial crown. But Spain is not another battlefield like Austerlitz or Jena, where armies meet and empires are decided in grand, sweeping strokes. Spain is a tangled, fiercely proud nation steeped in faith and history. What you anticipated as a simple regime change erupts into a wildfire of resistance. Peasants with pitchforks, priests rallying congregations, nobles leading fragmented bands, the entire populace rises, not in organized battalions, but in a decentralized, brutal, relentless guerrilla war. This isn't the enemy you know. They don't wear uniforms. They don't fight in formation. They don't hold territory. They strike from the shadows, ambush supply lines, melt back into the mountains and villages. Every road is perilous, every town a potential ambush. This spontaneous, fervent uprising catches you off guard. You underestimated the power of a people unwilling to be ruled by a foreign hand, especially one seen as secular and revolutionary by a deeply Catholic nation. Your brilliant strategic mind, honed on the maneuver of vast armies and the capture of capitals, finds no purchase here. You control Madrid, you control key cities, but you control little else. Spain becomes a bleeding wound, an abyss swallowing your best troops. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, veterans of countless victories, are tied down in a grinding, brutal conflict, with no front lines, no decisive battles, only endless, savage attrition. This painful, festering conflict quickly earns a name: the Spanish ulcer. It is here that your imperial ambition collides head-on with the raw, elemental force of national will. The ulcer isn't just a drain on resources, it's a moral corrosive. It shows the world that your military might, while formidable against other armies, cannot simply erase the identity and desire for freedom of an entire people. It reveals a blind spot. You valued control imposed from above, neglecting the essential element of popular consent. This war is a stark, bloody lesson that a throne is just a chair if the people refuse to let you sit in it. Ask yourself, when does strategic imposition become arrogant disregard for the human heart? The Spanish ulcer is the painful answer. The year is 1812. Spring breaks across Europe, but in the East, a different kind of season is dawning, the season of unstoppable ambition. You stand upon a rise, the cool air crisp against your face, and gaze upon a sight unprecedented in history. Below you, stretching as far as the eye can see, is the Grande Armée. Over 600,000 men, a living tide drawn from every corner of your vast empire. French, Italians, Poles, Germans, Dutch, Swiss. A kaleidoscope of uniforms, flags, and languages, all united under the eagle. This is your instrument, forged in years of victory, honed to a perfect, irresistible edge. You feel an almost dizzying sense of power, the master of destiny, the architect of a continent. Your target is clear: Russia. Tsar Alexander I, once an ally, now defies your continental system, a challenge to your authority you simply cannot tolerate. Pride burns hotter than strategic necessity. You envision a swift, dazzling campaign, a few decisive battles, perhaps a dash to Moscow, forcing the unpredictable Tsar to his knees, compelling him back into your sphere. As endless columns march east, dust rising like a golden haze in the sun, you feel truly invincible. You are not just commanding an army, you are commanding the very flow of history. This feels like the culmination of everything, the final piece falling into place to secure your vision of a Europe ordered by your will. This moment, however, is perhaps the purest distillation of your hubris. Intoxicated by an unbroken chain of triumphs, you embark on this monumental undertaking with a dangerous lack of foresight. The sheer scale of the army demands a logistical miracle, one you haven't adequately planned for. Supply lines stretch thin over vast, unmapped distances. The brutal Russian climate, the vastness of the land itself, these are adversaries you dismiss, confident your genius will overcome all obstacles. Advisors who do understand Russia, who warn of the dangers of pushing too deep, of relying on quick victories against an enemy willing to trade space for time, are waved away. Their caution feels like pessimism, a lack of faith in your star. The Grande Armée is a monument not just to your power, but to your self-belief. A fatal gamble driven by an absolute need to punish defiance and complete the map of your dominion. It is a tragic irony that the force you built to be invincible carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. planted by your own hand. Ask yourself, when faced with a decision of immense consequence, are you open to inconvenient truths, or do you only hear the echoes of your own confidence? A march into Russia is history's starkest lesson on how unchecked success can blind the most brilliant mind to the most obvious dangers. You believe the sun shines on you, that destiny bends to your will. But the sun, you will soon discover, can also scorch, and destiny, in the vast, empty plains of Russia, is a cold and unforgiving mistress. The snow falls relentlessly, a shroud over the endless plains. You are back in the Russian winter, a landscape that swallows armies whole. The Grand Armée, once a glittering tide of steel and ambition, is shattered not by valiant charges or tactical defeats in open battle, but by a far more insidious enemy: starvation, disease, and the brutal, unforgiving cold. What began as a strategic withdrawal has devolved into a chaotic rout, a descent into primal struggle. Discipline dissolves like mist in the sun. Men abandon their standards, their comrades, even the last vestiges of their humanity, in a desperate, every man for himself struggle for survival. The glorious eagles they swore to follow now lie buried beneath drifts of snow, symbols of a pride frozen solid. The journey becomes a horrifying gauntlet. The horses, starving, are butchered for meager sustenance. Wagons are abandoned, supplies rotting or stolen. The few remaining cannons are spiked and left behind. The thunder of war, replaced by the moans of the dying. And then comes the Berezina crossing. This icy river becomes the crucible, a scene of unimaginable suffering and chaos. Bridges collapse under the weight of panicked soldiers and desperate civilians caught in the wake. Men fight each other for a foothold on the narrow spans, trampled underfoot, pushed into the freezing water. The air rings with screams, the cracking ice, the sporadic fire from pursuing Cossacks. It is a bottleneck of absolute horror, a stark, brutal illustration of the price paid when grand strategy collides with logistical collapse and the indifference of nature. This frozen purgatory is the devastating cost of overweening ambition and strategic negligence. The retreat from Russia is not just a military defeat. It is a brutal lesson in the absolute limits of human power and the chilling indifference of the natural world. It demonstrates, with horrifying clarity, that charisma, tactical genius, and sheer force of will are no match for logistical failures on a continental scale. Environmental extremes weaponized by a cunning enemy, and an adversary willing to use the vastness of their own land as a defensive shield. The Grand Armée, the instrument forged by your ambition, built on years of triumphs and sacrifices, is not defeated by Alexander's generals, but destroyed by your own hubris, consumed by the winter you ignored. Look out across these frozen fields, at the scattered bodies, the abandoned dreams. Ask yourself, what is the true, immeasurable cost of your ambitions, not just to your own legacy, your empire, but to the hundreds of thousands who believed in you, who marched under your banner? The frozen plains of Russia bear silent, chilling witness to the fact that leadership failures born of excessive, unchecked ambition often result in immense, irreversible human suffering. A stark and tragic reminder of the crushing weight of responsibility you chose to carry and ultimately failed to bear. The gilded cage awaits. After the crushing weight of Russia and the relentless squeeze of Europe's vengeful hand, you, Napoleon, stand on the gangplank. You are not stepping into a new kingdom. You are stepping onto a forgotten rock in the Ligurian Sea. Elba. The name itself sounds like a sigh, a final exhale after a life lived at hurricane force. They have stripped you of your empire, your armies, your titles, all but a token sovereignty over this tiny island. The world believes this is the end. History is closing your book, perhaps with a weary sigh. But history misunderstands the nature of your ambition. It is not merely a tool you use to conquer. It is the air you breathe, the blood in your veins. Even here, surrounded by nothing but the sea and the quiet lives of fishermen, the engine of your mind refuses to idle. You pace the simple rooms of your villa, not in despair, but in restless calculation. Visitors come, bringing news, bringing gossip, bringing the whispers of discontent from the France you left behind. You devour Parisian newspapers, reading between the lines, seeing the caricature the Bourbons are making of their restored rule, stumbling over the complex nation you forged. This isn't retirement, it's reconnaissance. It's ambition in chains, but the chains are thin and your will is diamond hard. You organize the island, build roads, improve mines, play at being a miniature emperor. It's almost comical, this furious energy applied to such small tasks, a lion swatting at flies. But it is also deadly serious. Every administrative decision, every visitor, every scrap of news fuels the inner fire. You watch the Bourbons, Louis XVIII, trying to fit back into the throne like an ill-fitting suit. You see the resentments festering, the soldiers muttering, the people nostalgic for the glory and stability they lost. The thought isn't merely if you could return, but how and when. This relentless plotting isn't driven by necessity now. It's driven by an inability to stop. For some, ambition is a ladder they climb. For you, it's the very force holding you upright. The peace of Elba is a torture you cannot endure. The very idea of being forgotten, of your story ending on this quiet note, is unacceptable to the deepest core of your being. It's a profound insight into the man. Even absolute defeat cannot extinguish the internal fire that started it all. Ask yourself, is this incredible resilience fueled by ambition, or is it a tragic refusal to accept the reality of your downfall? Elba isn't just an exile. It's a laboratory demonstrating that for some, the drive to dominate, to influence, to be central, is not an external goal, but an intrinsic state of existence. And you, Napoleon, are the prime specimen. You are already planning your breakout, your audacious gamble, because the alternative, oblivion, is a fate worse than death or defeat. June 18th, 1815. The day dawns gray and damp over a field near Waterloo, Belgium. You stand here, observing the landscape, a muddy stage set for Europe's final act of this particular drama. Before you stretch the lines of a combined British and Allied army, led by the implacable Duke of Wellington. The air hums with tension, the lowing of cattle, replaced by the distant rattle of drums and the nervous neighs of thousands of horses. The fate of your empire, the fate of France, and your own fate, forged and reforged so many times, hangs precariously in this heavy, humid air. This battle is the culmination of your audacious return from Elba, the 100 Days. It was the ultimate gamble, a defiant refusal to accept the hand fate dealt you just a year prior. Your ambition, a force of nature that swept across continents, simply could not settle for exile on a tiny island. You heard the call of France, felt the lingering loyalty of your soldiers, and believed with every fiber of your being that you could seize the reins of power once more. And you did. But that act, thrilling and improbable as it was, set you on a collision course with every power in Europe, determined to see you contained, permanently. Waterloo is the consequence of that desperate, glorious dash back to Paris. A battle where fortune, strategy, timing, and the sheer stubbornness of your enemies collide. The initial movements begin. The French attack the Chateau of Hougoumont, a diversion that draws in Allied reserves, while simultaneously launching assaults on the center and left wing. The battle rages for hours, a brutal, seesawing struggle across the muddy ground. Cavalry charges crash against unbreakable squares of infantry. Artillery pounds the earth, sending plumes of mud and smoke into the sky. You direct movements, weighing reports, your legendary tactical mind racing, searching for the decisive blow. You see opportunities, push your reserves forward, and for moments, it feels like the old magic is working. The Allied line bends, but it does not break. Wellington's resolve is as firm as the squares his men form. A critical, often overlooked detail. The battle was delayed for several hours. The heavy rain the night before had turned the ground to a bog, making it difficult to move artillery and cavalry effectively. You waited for the ground to dry, needing to deploy your heavy guns and launch crushing cavalry assaults. That delay, seemingly minor, allowed time. Time for the Prussians, defeated at Ligny 2 days earlier, but not destroyed, to march relentlessly towards the sound of the guns. Time for Blücher, the fiery old marshal, driven by a personal vendetta, to rally his forces and join the fray. Was the gamble of waiting justified, or was it a fatal miscalculation dictated by circumstance? As the day wears on, the battle reaches its climax. You commit your most prized asset, the Imperial Guard, the Old Guard, veterans of countless victories, symbols of your invincibility. They march uphill, facing a storm of British fire, a column of granite against a wall of steel. Their charge is legendary, a final, desperate gamble for glory. But the Allied line holds. They meet the Guard withering fire, and famously Wellington's order, up guards and at them. The Old Guard falters, then breaks. The cry, "La Garde recule," the Guard retreats, echoes across the field, a sound few French soldiers had ever heard. It shatters morale, turning the tide irrevocably. Then, on the horizon, the Prussians arrive in force, a dark blue wave crashing onto your flank. Blücher has kept his promise to Wellington. Your army, exhausted and demoralized by the repulse of the Guard, is now overwhelmed from 2 sides. The retreat turns into a rout. The Old Guard forms squares, fighting to the last to protect your escape. Their final act, one of ultimate loyalty in the face of inevitable destruction. This muddy field, Waterloo, becomes the definitive end. It's not just a defeat, it's an unraveling. Your ambition, which carried you to such heights, has led you here. The return from Elba, while a masterstroke of audacity, was also an act of profound self-belief that bordered on denial. You believed you could defy the combined will of nations, that your genius could overcome any odds. Waterloo teaches a harsh lesson. Even the most brilliant ambition has its limits, especially when faced with determined opposition, unexpected factors like the weather, and the simple, brutal truth that not every gamble pays off. Ask yourself, At what point does persistence transform from courage into self-destruction? When is a final stand a display of unwavering principle, and when is it simply an inability to recognize that the game is truly, irrevocably lost? Waterloo is a tragic climax, proving that all power, no matter how absolute it feels, is ultimately conditional, vulnerable to the convergence of forces beyond even one man's control. The dice have been rolled one last time, and they have fallen against you. You are now on St. Helena, a tiny, remote island in the South Atlantic, guarded not just by British warships on the horizon, but by the sheer, indifferent vastness of the ocean itself. This is the end of the road, the final act played out on a stage no bigger than a forgotten rock. There is no army to command, no continent to conquer, only the relentless wind and the sound of the waves. The energy that once propelled you across Europe, that shattered empires and remade maps, is now confined within the walls of Longwood House, a modest, isolated dwelling that mocks the grandeur of the Tuileries. Here, stripped of power, your ambition finds its final desperate outlet: words. You spend your days dictating memoirs, shaping your narrative, meticulously crafting the legend of Napoleon for posterity. You argue with the British governor, Sir Hudson Lowe, over trivialities, a king reduced to squabbling over firewood, yet still asserting the immense, wounded pride of an emperor. This is the quiet, poignant echo of a life defined by overwhelming ambition, now whispering its story to the future, hoping to win one final battle, the battle for how history will remember you. The island is not just a geographical prison. It is a cage built by the consequences of your own actions. Every overreach, every disregarded warning, every belief in your own invincibility ultimately led you here, to this windswept rock. It is a lonely place, perhaps the only inevitable destination for an ambition so boundless, so convinced of its own rightness, that it could not coexist with the limits of the world, or indeed of reality. Ask yourself, was the relentless drive that brought France glory and you unimaginable power inherently flawed? Or was it the inability to ever say enough, to ever pause and reflect, that proved fatal? What would you have done, standing here, with only memory for company, watching your carefully constructed world crumble? The lesson echoes across the centuries, from the frozen plains where the Grand Army perished, to the muddy fields of Waterloo, and finally, to this desolate island. Ambition can build astonishing things, lift you to unimaginable heights, and inspire millions. But unchecked, unreflective ambition, fueled by an insatiable ego and a dangerous refusal to acknowledge limits, inevitably leads to isolation, destruction, and ultimately, a prison of your own making. You conquered Europe only to be conquered not by another army, but by the sheer, accumulating weight of believing yourself unconquerable. The irony is a bitter pill swallowed with the sea air. Consider the potential for such boundless ambition today, divorced from wisdom and restraint. What empires might fall, what suffering might unfold, under the sway of a will that believes itself above consequence. Napoleon's legacy isn't just one of military genius or legal reform. It is a timeless, universal cautionary tale, etched in blood and snow, whispered on the wind of this desolate island, as the emperor himself, perhaps with a final, weary understanding born of confinement, once mused, "History is a set of lies agreed upon." But the snow of Russia, the sands of Egypt, the mud of Waterloo, and the harsh, unforgiving rock of St. Helena remember the truth. And the truth is, even an emperor cannot escape the consequences of his own ambition.